How about in the cheap seats? All right, good. Okay, so no, I'm not getting paid. Rob can cut me some of that Pat's money if he wants round two. So I started off by calling this talk Contextual Detection of something very long and academic-y that I can't remember now because I'm about 3 beers in, folks. So, and this also has the distinction of being a talk that I submitted slides for, and some of the panel said, "You got to take those slides out." That's a little bit racy. So I don't know if that's a first. Yeah. No. Okay. Well, your words, and also theirs. No. They were very kind. The faux pas I had made, purposely. So, anyways, this is. I'm gonna, after the brief intro, I'm going to go into why I actually almost pulled this talk due to nerves and other things. So, for those unfamiliar with me and my speaking style, I swear, I make jokes, I make awful jokes, I make offensive, awful jokes. I rarely need a microphone, as you saw earlier, and I have to mention my universal unpalatability, which is actually a word. I looked it up. But at the end of it all, I do answer all questions. Anybody, anywhere who knows, like kind of the real me, knows that it's mostly just jokes. I find being a contrarian very funny, and certain jokes being hilarious to me. And I will join anyone, anywhere for their choice of beer, wine, milk, or gluten-free hot dogs. This excludes Boston because I've actually been escorted out of there on one occasion. I was escorted to the city line, yes. With a parolee under some sheets and the groom in the trunk. Italian wedding, sorry. All right, so now here is the sad part. I had submitted my talk, and I'd been doing this. I made my first commit a couple years ago, literally 2 years ago, on GitHub for image analysis using vision techniques. And then a very good friend of mine who works at a federally funded research and development center, who actually frequents several very unknown and not very lauded cons, sent me this file from 2011. So I had to actually go back and revisit and revamp and make sure that everything that I said here didn't conflict or didn't wholesale copy from this guy's paper, even though I truly hadn't seen it. So I read through, like I said, I read through the deck and almost canceled because it said the words were malware, visual detection, and even the same points on signature detection and heuristics detection, like the facts about them and what traps you in this little malware detection box. I forgot to take out the words, the kicker. And then I kind of cheered up because I beat the shit out of myself. And then actually reading the talk, I had done several things very, very, very differently. And on top of that, I'm actually dropping code. You guys can take this GitHub repo and you can clone it and whatnot, and do whatever. Like, this is just a start. You want to do your own thing? Go for it. Go nuts. I warn you, it's not great code, but functionally I was able to do the demos and I was able to pull out the samples that I point to later. And the key point is when you're talking about malware detection schemes, don't we kind of talk about the same things over and over again, like signature detection, heuristic detection, and what it means and what it is? So I didn't feel too bad about actually hitting that same point, even if it was incredibly similar. So when it comes to binary detection and signature detection, malware detection, and even code analysis, because code analysis in attributing families of malware, families of attribution, is getting kind of critical these days, especially on the attribution side. You know, there's a lot of folks who talk attribution. We need kind of every weapon in our arsenal to go through and actually trace back how things were written, where they came from, how much alike are they to another family. So that's becoming just as important as, oh, I saw somebody had named their box configure and it was broadcasting out to the domain. I better go check that out. So this is going to be there's a lot of attack papers on here, and this is going to be very kind of defense-oriented. So I don't know how you would use this in an attack scene. So I just kind of stick to what I know. And right now I've been kind of on the defensive software time for a while, especially with RE and whatnot. So, but there are a few slides that I did earlier that I wanted to keep in there because I think that I illustrated a little bit better what the guy in the paper was trying to say. So here is my current drawing of how signature detection works. So we see the nice little Mr. and Pimp malware up here. So, and the one on the left is decidedly plain and very obvious. So we got PC Principal going woo 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 woo, and then the one on the right puts himself in a fancy hat and says no, I'm not malware, I'm cool. So we got Officer Bar Brady going, move along, people, nothing to see here, you looky-loos. And this is kind of how I represented heuristic detection. One of the chief differences between me and Nataraj was the title of the lead guy on the paper, was that he said that the only factors that won't go into the heuristic detection is the fact that it takes very long. And I'm going to say, yeah, if you consider possibly affinity very long. You know, malware can take several different branches and links in the chain to achieve its end state, and if you're only keying in on a few triggers, you're going to miss the overall picture. So we see the bad virus, and he's going to get caught by Bloodhound or one of those other heuristic engines at the end there, but then you see the same malware take a different track, and he ends up being just fine, even though they're kind of all going to Mordor, or wherever that is. They're all traveling to Mordor. They will arrive there, but only one will get caught by Sauron and his minions. And this is what the heart of visual detection is. You and I, as people, we all recognize that in spite of the kind of Fruit Loop shape and the sail shape and the old building there and the clip art, we recognize that these are all representations of buildings. So that's what we're trying to do here. Is these are all buildings. There are many like it, but only one is mine. So here's how it's overlaid in my fancy malware. I'm sorry, I got this from a free clip art site. So if this is somebody else's friggin' bug, or if it's the guy from the Mucinex commercial, I have no idea. It didn't have anything on it. So I was like, all right, fine, this will work. I'm gonna put a fancy hat on it anyways. We'll get to Rule 34 at the end. So we see here that we're kind of picking out a few features like eyes, tentacles, and you know, like these blemishes and everything. And Mr. Smart Cat over here is going, what? And then Mr. Chris Hansen is telling us, why don't we have a seat right over there? So you sir, you in the blue, right over there, please. Right side of the aisle. This is I call it the detection triangle. With the paper that I kind of go back to didn't really have a term or whatever. Yeah, the detection triangle. All right. Didn't really have a go away phone. Sorry. Dude, it's Mauvehead. Do I answer it? I can't answer it. Hold on a second. Sorry. This is good. Yes, Mauvehead, I'm on stage. Did you just call to say you love me? Fucking. All right, you heard it here first at ISSW. You can't interrupt an entire talk because Mauvehead calls you. To say, yeah, boy. So here's a summary of the detection triangle, quote unquote, fancy air quotes. Signature, you know, what does something have an exact match for? Heuristic, what does it act like? And visual, what does it resemble? So signature has scaling issues. For anybody who's dealt with older virus, like you are on a network that has a lot of legacy systems, every now and then you pick up a very old virus that the signatures have been long since deprecated. So it's nice to see a virus from about 10 years ago actually work in a new pool, all because they couldn't fit any more signatures in the virus engine and they had to cut down on size. So there's a big-time scaling issue when it comes there. Poison ivy. So heuristic acts like it needs to be run. You need to run in a sandbox, cuckoo, or whatever you have. Personally, I'm kind of a QEMU, KVM, roll your own guy. I like the nice GDB stub. So I like to do my own stuff. But and then there's visual, which kind of resembles, but it's incredibly immature right now. That's like we're just getting things like connects and all those different pieces of software that are able to pick features out of a feature set. So I'm hoping that as that comes along, these other technologies are going to also improve. So what if it is implemented? This is going to kind of raise the bar on that detection level. You're adding another layer that is different than the other two. So instead of just adding another layer of kind of sameness or another run, you're adding a different concept to the chain. So you're going to grab. I feel you're going to grab more stuff eventually, and I'll show that how it can work in later slides. I'm not going to run the full up demo because I get really worried when I have to interact with a MySQL database that isn't exactly here. So I'm just going to show you the data instead. So here's where the big differences come from the paper, otherwise titled, "I'm sorry, Rich, I didn't understand you until I got back into my room." So Rich and I had a conversation, and he actually flat out asked me, he's like, "Hey, have you heard anything about Euclidean distance and feature detection, blah, blah, blah?" And I completely spaced out because I had not written in here Euclidean distance anywhere, so I completely phased out on it. And so I'm sorry, Rich. I actually do acknowledge Euclidean distance in here. I'm really sorry that I've had no clue what you're talking about for a minute. Is that? Holy hell, that's kind of cut off. Whatever. So in the Nataraj paper, they say they go with a feature space model, which is basically taking the binary and putting it on in a three-dimensional space, and then the entire executable is an image of it is put in that space, and then they do a distance calculation to see how similar those two are based on a set of filters and rotations that they do. So for me, though, I was using phash in the cimage library, and inside of there is the discrete cosine transform 2 function to do feature extraction. So and then I'm feeding that data into later calls within phash. So a little bit of a difference there. So let's get some terms. For those who saw, I think, Dan Crowley's talk, he talked about Levenshtein distance. This is Hamming distance, different but the same. So, discrete cosine transform, DCT2, cimage, a lib that I've been using that you have to use in conjunction with phash in order to actually do the image manipulation. It's not included. And phash is the lib I'm using to actually feed back the binary data into and compute the Hamming distance. So why is the DCT or discrete cosine transform important when it comes to detection techniques? The power of DCT, and specifically the DC2 variation, which is the one that is most commonly used, is, and this is right out of Wikipedia, but emphasis added for me. So it's great for lossy compression, right? What does that mean to you? You can express a whole lot of visually significant data in a much denser set, which allows the more prominent features to come up and the noise to kind of fall away. So, and why feature extraction? Once you feed it into phash, it allows us to do Hamming distance instead of 3D calculations. And here is, for those of you who are maybe math people, so this was the actual Euclidean algorithm that I'm very sorry for. So the Hamming way is actually 1 XOR, I believe, so in the major calculation, whereas the Euclidean distance is this square root of the first point minus all that, like all those coordinates, and then you're doing squares and square roots, and I'm sorry I didn't have a function, like nice little outline. I actually typed that out myself, so very codey and not very algorithm-looking-y. Science. So, so I actually think that this just notionally is going to be a touch quicker for anybody who knows how quick an XOR is. Hamming distance. The best definition I saw signified that the Hamming distance is a number to denote the difference between two binary strings of equal length. And I think that might be, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that might be the key difference between that and Levenshtein difference. I think Levenshtein difference is if they're two dissimilar strings, it's still going to tell you that not only is it off, but it's off by this many, it's off by this length too. So here is the actual final calculation that I do down at the bottom, and that's the p-hash function for Hamming distance. It's incredibly simple, straightforward, and if you look at the p-hash code, it's a really easy math calculation. But I want to talk about this guy, because I did an ECC talk a ways back for SAHA, the San Antonio Hackers Association, which I hail from. Yeah. And this dude ended up being way more fascinating than the actual discussion of ECC, parity checking and whatnot. So, so this guy Hamming, Richard Hamming, was everything that is Hamming X is his. Like, that's what he made. Him and another group of guys just sat down and, he's part of the Manhattan Project, at least notionally, if not in there. I forgot whether or not he was actually in the same building, but he was attached to it. And he bought Klaus Fuchs's car. See how I fit that in there? And yes, Klaus Fuchs is the guy who has a patent on the entire, he has the key patent on, the nuclear bomb. So he was a Soviet double agent. This guy went back and bought his car. He's like, I want that guy's car, can I have it? And then he just bought it. So, which I have several people whose cars I'd like to buy if it was this easy. So now I want to get into the how of how we're doing this, this final comparison. So what I'm doing is splitting the data into chunks, and then I'm just straight up doing a byte translation to BMP, right? I'm using CImage, taking in an array of bits, and then boom, bitmap. That's all I'm doing, and those are the bytes from the executable. Then the data gets fed into the DCT computation, and then you compute the Hamming distance, and then you can either compare right then and there, or you can store it for later use. In the GitHub repo, I actually have a database that has a very easy way and a very light footprint way of storing these hashes and being able to translate them back to individual chunks of files, so that you can actually go back and do your comparisons, get a file path, things like that. And here is the beautiful glyphy, whatever, free glyphy diagram that I did. So you got a stack of files to examine. You feed them into the similarity executable, and CImage or other library. They work in conjunction with phash, so they're kind of not separable, but the data goes into CImage, and then it gets pumped to phash, all in one binary, and then and then it generates the DB insert logic. I have a stored procedure on the hash database that takes all of that and puts it where it's supposed to. And then you can go back and forth. You see the double arrow here? That means back and forth. To and fro, stop and go. So, let a puh on this. So, here is me carving up the image, and the image that I generated. So, it was you carve up the individual segments at kind of a known offset. I think a few K is sufficient. And then you perform the DCT, store the hash value, and then keep repeating with the other chunks. So this is all running off of one executable. In the Nataraj paper, he does it based there's a bunch of them actually. They stack the executables and they stack the binaries according to size. And I actually think you are going to miss tons of data if you are trying to do a wholesale comparison of entire executables, when what you should really be doing is taking little code snippets, because what happens if I have a malware author who uses a custom like SSL lib, but he has several different tools, but they all have one thing in common, this small SSL lib. If his tools are different enough, you're going to see significant difference in the overall binary, and you're never going to catch that the lib might actually be the same. So I think actually carving up the image and doing smaller hashes of smaller data is a little bit better to do. So immediate applications, right? How do I make this pertinent to me immediately? Process dumps, process memory. You're not storing process dumps anywhere, right? But you can actually pull out little, like examine the virtual memory space and do these visual calculations just by going through process memory and then pulling back smaller hashes and sending them over the wire. For anybody who's ever had to do, like say Ncase or one of those other applications where you can actually pull process memory over the wire, pulling back gigs upon gigs of process memory, or even one target process memory, can be several hundred megs to several gigabytes. And instead, you can do this, and then you can get a pretty good grasp of what is actually in there without having to do a full pull. So here's how here's an example of how I did a dump. Phrasing. So thank you, Peanut Gallery. So I injected a DLL into memory, and then I dumped process memory and walked that, and actually I put that in the database, like hashes of that inside the database. Normally you would do the reverse, but the result is actually the same. So either way, I'm doing a hash for hash comparison across the images. And then the run with similarity and the results file should contain matches for the DLL. Maybe not perfectly, but the matches should be in there towards the top of the stack. And it turns out they were. So here we have, oh wow, that showed up way better than it does on here. So I actually injected a DLL that I wrote into 7-zip file manager. So that's what those lines are, 7-zip fm.exe, the dump. And it was able to say, oh, I see that inject.dll, which was it was a very simple binary, so it was going to match a lot of stuff, purposefully so, because I wanted to have the plainest Janus code that I could and see if this actually worked, and it did. It was able to catch it in process memory towards within the top 5. So, hooray! I don't fail all the way. To double check some of this work too, because you always have to check. And I took a standard Windows DLL and I just started writing random bytes all over the place to about anywhere between 10 and 50% of the executable was changed. And all of the 14 out of 14 matches, and I did change, there were a total of 14 sections, or 14 unique sections that were carved up. And I got 14 out of 14 section matches with the modified DLL. So that was from about a 10 to 15% change. I'm sure that as this field continues to mature and develop, what you're going to end up seeing is the vision techniques becoming better or more targeted, or somebody's going to apply an additional translation that actually, maybe pulls that up to where we're catching half of these things now instead of just 10 to 15%. Some of the optimization that I kind of acknowledge is that you can actually prep the hash field. Like you can generate a few very close Hamming distance, Hamming weighted hashes, and then submit those in a bulk query instead of just doing one for one. And if you get something relatively close, you can say, well, it's a pretty close match, so let's take a further look at it. This isn't designed to be a standalone. This is designed to take in swaths of data, and then you can pass on to further analysis for what you want to see. So I always recommend a person be in the chain at some point. And now for one of the very large benefits. So sir, you're golden. Put back on your mask. Get back to your beer. So I had about 111 megabytes of of a process dump representation, and I could take that and bring it to visual hashes and store that is about 4 megabytes worth of database entries. With the best compression that 7-zip could afford, that process dump only went down to 40 megs, so I was able to represent a significant chunk of the data using only 4 megabytes instead of the full 40. So for those of you that are poor at math like me, that ends up being 10 times more better. 10 times more better. They don't all land, folks. I got a more better. Don't judge me. So there was also some overlap when I was examining System 32. So I always examine System 32. Sometimes delete it. And I saw a lot of overlap between 32-bit executables and their 64-bit counterparts. So maybe some of the instructions certainly aren't the same. However, their overall structure appeared to show that, yeah, there are some similarities here, even though you've compiled it different and you haven't taught me anything new about the DLL. You've just kind of run this tool against it, or this code set against it. So some very hard lessons learned from me, aside from the obvious look before you leap thing that I had. Stored procedure versus on the host. I'm sure that in some database out there or some method, you could do the Hamming distance calculation on the DB itself, and maybe it would be a little bit faster. But I found that it was much faster for me just to run it on the host. So, oh Christ. So, yeah, fudge it, do it live. Klaus fucks it, do it live. So, next steps. This is still a very manual process. I've had it hooked up to the database, and I had an ODBC connector and everything, but it wasn't really achieving the speed that I wanted. So I still dumped a manual database query, and then I just ran that with SQL Workbench, and it ended up going a little bit faster. A lot of this, since it is all image manipulation and like hash math or integer math, you can probably move a lot of this to offline to a video card. There's a lot of very cheap discount Bitcoin rigs coming available now, as people are getting out of that market and seeing that they are way behind the times if they're using a GPU. So there are some very discounted rigs on eBay at this moment. Go forth and buy some. So if you want to, you can actually probably port this to OpenCL or CUDA or your graphics language of choice, and you'll probably see a little bit better speed on the calculations. So let's see. So extending this, we all like. Some of us like the fact that VirusTotal exists in so much that I could submit hashes to it. I don't submit my binaries to it, but I will submit a hash. And if you kind of meme combine these things, you're going to spread out how much detection you can do over the space. So using the code, the bottom line. So set up a turnkey MySQL VM. Works just fine. Download MySQL Workbench, deploy the database template. In GitHub, there is a database template. It has the stored procedure in there for uploading the hashes. It has everything you need to sort of start and prime your own database. Change the DB user password to whatever. Right now, it's root password. So very secure. So, but you're deploying it on your own home system, so you do whatever you want. I don't care. This is all in a sandbox for me. So root password works just fine. And please remember, this is just a simple POC. This is not a professional product. I'm not getting paid mad ducats for this, so I'm not getting those Krugerrands. So just be gentle. I've spent a lot of time hammering out some of the finer points, but not so much the code. But it did work for me. Works on my box. All right. now I can kind of chill. So, all right, you jackasses. I'm done with my slide deck now. I'm on the prop slide, so I can handle you, and you, Mr. Mask. Who calls during a talk? Oh, it's Mauvehead, and I answered you because you're that important to me. Why don't you just take it as love? Aww, bah. And you were lonely. You looked lonely when I left you at the bar. I see you, baby. So let's get on with the props. Props to Saha. I think we've whoop whoop. We've been doing this for a while, and they allow me to speak frequently. Please, if you are in the area, come by and see us. We are on the 6th of every month, rain or shine, or no matter what day it is, and I'm not changing the date again, swearsies. So AHA, the mothership, the greater Ha, I guess. they have fancier items and better hair. So. Case in point. Although we have way more morals charges on our records. Thank you, Cyber Enigma, for being half that stack. I want to thank ISSW and like Todd and Chris and Druid for giving me my first kind of primetime walk in the park. Sweet, isn't he? Of course, I won't leave my phone on again. So I also want to call out some of the things where I found some little code snippets. I didn't want to go through and rewrite mem walking code. Windows process walking code is pretty much the same universally. I just found some stuff on Code Project that worked. So that's what I used. I retained the copyright, but I want to acknowledge that, hey, here was the first place where I found this version of mem walking code. So, and then the VisSec, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that this was the link to the Nataraj visual PDF that got sent to me. So if you can, go through, read it. It is way less on the POC. It's a different methodology. You should go through, read it, understand their methodology and how they do it, and hopefully somebody will write a POC that does it like they're doing it, but this is kind of how I did it. And here's how you get at me. So at Angelo Vescio, turns out at Vesh was taken almost the minute Twitter opened. So, you know, short four-letter word, and it turns out everybody in Italy has a last name Vescio, and they go by Vesh, unknown to me. So that's also my email, vesh@satxhackers.org. That's the GitHub repo. And I just have one more thing, I guess, really, before we take on questions. What's the time? What's the time? Sorry, I was gonna blur out Druid a little bit, but I figured, nah, let him stay. He took the picture, or he was in the picture. So, oh god, that picture of you, Kevin, is freaking priceless. All right, so I've got about 6 and some change minutes left. I saw on the schedule it looked like I only had 30, so I should have been obeying the clock. God. Okay, I see it. So any group questions or whatnot, or do we save questions for after talk? All right, I can see hands. I can see. I'll be able to see your hands through this. Mm-hmm. I was basically doing it on what would generate a 32 pixel by 32 pixel image. So I forget whatever size that was. It ended up working, and I just kind of stuck with it. You can increase or decrease the size or aperture as you see fit. But I would suggest that once you find an offset that works for you, stick with it, because that's going to be how you look for hashes from there on. That's, you know, if you start changing the aspect of the picture, you're going to obviously change what is generated or what is poured into the hash. No problem. Next. All right. All right, peace. I'm out of here then.